Alright, let me tell you one of the craziest stories from medieval Europe that you ever gonna hear. So this is a story about a saint, about a warrior, an imposter, and what happens when you're so important, when you carry so much gravitas that people literally not let you die. So buckle up, story time. So it's 15th century France, and this girl from the middle of nowhere rocks up and starts claiming that she is sent by God to defeat the enemies of France and to put the King Charles VII on the throne as the legitimate king of the unified France. Now he buys into that story, he puts her in charge of an army, she goes on to fight the English until she was finally captured, and here comes the twist. See, she was captured and executed in 1431, and she was executed by being burned at the stake. Now, at the time, she went all this route from being somebody who is completely not important to being a literal saint, so the English, who were so keen on eliminating her, were very well aware of this, and they wanted to make sure that everybody know that the symbol is gone. So what they did when they burned her at the stake, they made sure to rake back all the charcoal and the wood and to show people that they're actual bones, actual remainings of Joan of Arc. Not only that, but they also burned them for the second time, and eventually they tossed them into the sand because they didn't want people to collect them and to make relic out of them and to have everybody uniting over this common cause once again because they didn't want to fight anymore. But here's the problem. She was very well known and she was so important that the rumors still started to circulate around even though they went through all this trouble to make sure that she's gone. People started talking. So at one point you had a lot of girls popping up around France claiming to be Joan of Arc. Some were claiming that they were she. Others were claiming that they were inspired by her acts. Others were claiming then that they were sent by God to finish the job that she started. And a lot of people were making a lot of money out of all this. They kind of became like influencers of the time. Now, most of them faded away fairly quickly, except one notable exception. Now, her name was Claude d'Armas. I probably butchered that. It's French, so sorry. But she was actually in the service of Pope, and she was fighting there for a year right after the death of Joan of Arc, when she started to come up with a plan. Now the plan was go back to France and start convincing people that she was actually Joan of Arc and she was still alive, and to, well, see where things go. Now first she goes to the brothers of the actual Joan of Arc, and according to the legend and what is known, they buy into the story. Now it's not known if they did this because they genuinely believed that she was Joan of Arc, or maybe they were just in on the story because they knew that there's a lot of money to be made out of this whole thing. In any case, they start going around northern France from town to town, and people start throwing money at them left and right. All kinds of gifts. They were inviting them for dinners. They were not paying anything. Free accommodation, free fame, free everything. And credit given where credit due. Apparently, she did a lot to make sure that she really looked like Joan of Arc. She started behaving like her. She started wearing men's clothes, which was one of the things that Joan of Arc was associated with. She was wearing armor and a sword, and she was speaking in these biblical terms. So there was a lot of mystique around her, and people just buying into it because remember, it's medieval times, so not a lot of people have actually got the opportunity to see Joan of Arc. Now, that being said, a lot of people were familiar of how she looked like because a lot of people fought with her, and when she and they started meeting these nobles, well, nobody really said anything negative about it. They all kind of went with it. Now, undoubtedly, some people most certainly knew that this is not the real deal, but you know, she's famous and they were around her, so who knows, maybe there's something in for them too. Now, at one point, one, I believe, count actually falls in love with her in all of this crazy story, and he actually puts her in charge of a military force that was en route to the city of Cologne, where they were supposed to support a certain bishop for his role. And that's where things start to turn the other way. See, she started to go a little bit off the rails. She's getting a little bit too much into the role. The fame gets to her, and there she starts to party a little bit too much, to drink a little bit too much. She's attracting all kinds of crowd around her, and people start to suspect certain things because Joan of Arc would probably never do something like that because she was pretty much like a saint at that point. Now, unfortunately for Claude, this attracts the attention of a local Inquisition, and they started suspecting witchcraft because remember, it is medieval Europe. And to add fuel to the fire, she was actually performing some minor tricks like tearing clothes and then making them appear like they're not torn and stuff like that. So there was a lot of reasons for them and their mindset to suspect something like this. Now she gets a word of this, and the count that sent her there actually helps her to escape, and the Inquisition in return excommunicates her and basically declares her a witch. But it appears that this really didn't do much to her reputation. Now shortly after this, she marries a knight. They have 2 sons, but at one point she finds herself at the city of Orleans, a city that was famous for Joan of Arc's siege. Now, once again, when she was there, she was celebrated. They threw a lavish party with food and music and all kind of things. But at one point, she was supposed to meet a tailor that was making clothes for the original Joan of Arc, and that is when she starts panicking. Now here's the thing, if you're a tailor, then you have to take measurements, and she suspected that this guy would probably realize that she's not the real deal, right? So she decides to leave the party soon, which raises some suspicions even more. Now right after this, we go to the point of the final breakdown, and that is when the king himself, Charles VII, invites her to visit him to make sure that she's the real deal because he also has some suspicions and a little bit of hope. So she goes to meet the king, but the king decides to do something that he did to the original Joan of Arc when he wanted to make sure that she's the real deal, and that is to set up a certain test. So what he did, he put an imposter, a doubler, on the throne, and he moved on the side amongst the nobles. She wanted to see how she gonna react when she meets the king because she never met him before. She doesn't know how he looks like, but if she is the real Joan of Arc, she'll be able to recognize him. For a better context, this is exactly what he did to the original Joan of Arc, but she recognized that he's the one who's sitting on the throne is not the real deal, and she approached the real king. And for the surprise of everyone and the king, this is exactly what happened this time as well. So Claude recognized that the guy sitting on the throne is not a king, and allegedly she did this because of his boots. See, she probably heard a rumor or whatever it was that the king was wearing different boots because on one of his legs he had an ulcer, so he had to wear a soft skin boot. She looked down and she saw that the imposter has regular boots, and then she looked around and she saw somebody who has one different than the other one. She approached and she said, "You're the king." But here's come the problem. See, the king was impressed, but he had another ace up his sleeve, and that is a sort of a secret code that he and the original Joan of Arc shared on their first meeting. So he welcomed her, but he asked her, "What is the code among us?" Meaning the one that they're only one privy to. And this is where the whole thing breaks down. She falls on her knees and she admits that the whole thing was a ruse, it was a charade. She just took advantage of it and she a little bit got too crazy with it, but she begged for forgiveness. Now, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, she was forgiven and she was sent to live the rest of her life with her husband in the countryside. So I guess at the end, the whole thing played out pretty well. So that's the story, and it's pretty crazy because you gotta think those things were probably happening a lot more than we know, because it is the Middle Ages. It's not like today that you can just open up your phone and see who's online and see exactly how every celebrity looks like. So you can totally just rock up and pretend to be somebody who you are not until inevitably at some point the whole thing falls apart. But in her case, this lasted for years. Anyways, let me know what you think, and as always, if you want to hear more from me about history, science, or anything interesting, consider liking, subscribing, following, and in the meantime, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next one.